Well, if New York City is a city that never sleeps, there could surely be said that the subway is the lifeblood of that city, getting people moving from place to place, wherever you need to go for the low price of $2.75 until the next fare hike. But there is no light at the end of the tunnel as it is for people who depend on the L train service. This is a photo, of course, of the Canarsie tube that connects the L train with the rest of the world. I'm going to go to our first slide here. So I'm looking right now at old and sick. That's a description that someone used for our subway system. There's 728 miles of mainline signals that make up the MTA's underground system, and 269 of those have exceeded their 50-year lifespan of usefulness. That means that those signals are still plugging on, but they definitely are in need of a little rehab. 26% of them more than 70 years old, and 11% are between 50 and 69. So we're talking about a rapidly aging system here when we look at New York City subways. The parts for some of these things aren't even made anymore when you're talking about infrastructure. So moving on to our next slide here. The L train, which is what we're talking about today. The Canarsie tube, which we just showed you, was damaged during Hurricane Sandy. You may also remember that our train service was offline for a long time. There are about 65,000 people who depend on the R train service every day. And if you can look at this number, 300,000 New Yorkers depend on the L train service on the average weekday. If you've ever been on that platform in the morning, it feels like all 300,000 are waiting with you. But the M train service should be boosted during the time that the L train service might be offline for 3 years, as well as G trains getting 2 additional cars and a whole army of shuttle buses to help make up for that lack. So in conclusion, we've definitely gonna take you back to no light at the end of the tunnel. We've got an aging system that's in need of a lot of repair, but that progress comes with the pain, which means a bad commute. Greg?
Wow, lots to unpack. All right. There are rumors that Kurt Russell is in talks to produce a sequel called Escape from Brooklyn, Shuttle Bus to Freedom. Okay, jokes aside, that's in the script. We're going to get the latest on this story, how politicians are spinning it, and how landlords, tenants, bosses, and workers will be affected from Gwen Hogan, a reporter and producer covering Williamsburg, Greenpoint, and Bushwick for DNAinfo.com New York. Welcome, Gwen. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course, and we also want to welcome via Skype Hiten Samtani. Excuse me, there's something wrong with the monitor. Real estate manager and editor at therealdeal.com. Thank you very much, both of you, for being on BK Live. Gwen, let's start with you here in studio. This is devastating to think of the L train shutting down for 3 years, not just for people in Williamsburg, but for people all over the 5 boroughs. When would we be looking at this as a reality?
So it's totally still on the table in terms of what they're going to do. They haven't really come out with an official announcement about what it's going to be, but it looks like it's not going to be before the end of 2016. But they have floated 2 possible options, which is a full shutdown for 18 months, which means no service between First Avenue and Bedford Avenue for that time, which is kind of crazy.
It's insane to think about,
The other option is the 3 years, and that's doing 1 tube at a time. So they would have limited service for 3 years.
Oh, that's almost more annoying
which is also crazy.
Yeah.
So, but again, these aren't the only options in theory. There are still other possibilities. But the idea of doing just nights and weekends, I think, would take an eternity for them to do all the repairs that they would need to do.
So, Tim, when we look at the 2nd Avenue subway, just the sort of the whiff that train was going to come did wonders for that 2nd Avenue real estate prices and business. And then the reality came of the actual construction of the thing. What do you think this is going to mean for real estate values in Brooklyn, especially with all these towers springing up on the waterfront now?
Good to see you again, Brian.
You too.
One of the things, construction is very different from repair, right? 2nd Avenue subway is something that is still an idea in people's heads, whereas the L train is a very, very, it's a part of daily life for a lot of people in Brooklyn. You said 300,000 daily. On the rental side, it's probably going to have a serious impact. It's going to hurt rents quite a bit. But on the sales side, brokers are eternal optimists. They're talking about how this is probably the best time to buy.
Oh yeah, I definitely have my eye on prices slipping, but realistically, how much do you think they'll dip? Because everyone knows it's just a temporary thing. You can suck it up and ride a bike like me for the next 3 years, God willing.
Well, brokers are saying that if it's a complete shutdown, prices on the rental side could drop about 15%. That's probably the worst case scenario. On the sales side, again, it shouldn't really affect things too much because people are buying. They're playing the long game when they're buying, so it shouldn't really affect prices too much. What could be really interesting is what happens to the Airbnb market and the short-term rental market, because Williamsburg is always sold or portrayed as, 15 minutes from Manhattan.
Right.
That's never true, and it's going to be even more untrue now when this happens. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Airbnb. And conversely, with Uber's going to, this is Uber's wet dream, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't overstate how devastating this feels like it's going to be for people that live in Williamsburg. What are the residents there saying?
I mean, besides residents who are obviously going to have to find alternative ways of getting to Manhattan if they're commuting that way, business owners are like terrified, especially like in the Williamsburg area where they're relying on tourists, they're relying on people that are coming in from Manhattan, like for restaurants, bars.
They were up in arms when a few weekend closures, and they were like
where they had a huge dip in business.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like the commuters in this case are going to be pitted against the businesses in a little bit of ways because they have, like, if it's weekends, then it benefits the commuters, but if it's weekends, then the businesses are going to suffer.
And it feels a little bit like the way that Williamsburg has changed over the few years has contributed to the way that Brooklyn has changed on a whole. So if you take that L train out for 3 years, it can negatively impact Brooklyn on a whole. I don't know. We'll see what happens. You reported yesterday.
People are saying it's going to be like a recession. Like, it would be akin to a recession.
Yeah, and it may not be an overstatement. I mean, you reported yesterday there's going to be a meeting between the MTA and some of the residents there in Williamsburg. What can people expect from that meeting? I mean, certainly maybe a shouting match.
Well, there was a meeting where they brought an MTA rep who was supposed to just listen.
Yeah.
But that was just, it didn't turn out well because people were so angry and had no answers. And he was like, I can't say anything. I'm not allowed to. So the politicians met with him where they had like more of an open dialogue on Friday. And then there's going to be another public meeting at the end of the month. But it's not clear if the MTA is going to be there yet. So it's sort of like, it's not really sure when they're going to put out any more information.
So then looking at commercial development, back to you with the real estate angle, is this going to affect commercial? I know you clued us into sort of that long game thinking. If you want to build an office, you're not going to do it just for the 3 years there, but there's all this like startup energy and creative people doing things in small batches there. Does that mean that they may shift a little bit more than the sort of corporate headquarters kind of folks?
I think development is a different ballgame because when you're developing, you're hoping to, as you said, tap into that momentum. A lot of people on the residential side, residential developers are going to understand that people are now afraid and are going to wait and watch to see what happens. So they'll definitely pull back. On the office front as well, why would a hot tech startup with a lot of people who come in every day, why would they want to be in Williamsburg right now? It's just not the right time. When things are a little more clear, there might be a change.
Hatem, do you think it could work conversely where people say, you know what, half of my employees are marooned along the L train. Maybe I should have a satellite office, or maybe we should just go in and be a Brooklyn-based company?
It could happen. What they might end up doing is just leasing more short-term space, like a WeWork or something like that. I don't think they would shift their strategy based on what happens with the MTA for the next year and a half. But for the short term, that could be true.
Do you know when we'll get an answer on whether or not this will be 3 years or a year and a half? Maybe you don't. Okay. What about? Okay, we can skip over that then.
It's
I mean,
by March we're going to have. By the end of March, we should have a little bit more information.
And by the end of 2016, it sounds like the train may be shut down. I mean, what about the? I don't know if I'm editorializing, but these are kind of privileged people that live in Williamsburg in 2016 because of the very high rents that they're paying. So that being said, with their train shut down, what do you think about the neighborhood dynamics, how this will affect the neighborhood surrounding the L train?
The L train is a long line.
It's a long line, and
runs
it's
the whole
still a diverse
spectrum.
neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah.
There's lots of housing projects.
From Williamsburg
there's
out
lots
to
of rent
Jefftown, they
stabilized
call it
tenants.
now, and
I mean, it's
Canarsie.
all different kinds of people that are going to be affected by this. Yeah, I mean, if you live in Canarsie and you want to go to Broadway Junction and then you switch to the ACE, your commute's probably going to be an hour longer if you're trying to go to Manhattan. So, I mean, I think it's going to have a huge impact, and it's hard to see all the different ways it's going to play out yet.
So is this just another argument for Brooklyn seceding from the rest of the city? Just go full-on republic? We got the real estate interest. We got businesses. We don't need them.
I don't know.
Not
That's
a real
good question. I don't know what to say.
So, Tim, are there any examples where people have come out on the other side even better? I know I evoked Second Avenue a while ago, but the R train, you know, they were offline for a while, and I don't know if businesses, if there's still a lingering effect this time later.
Well, if you ask Governor Cuomo, the R train was a massive success because I believe it's one of the few projects, or maybe the only project, in the MTA's history where the repairs took less time than they were estimated to take. So a year after it was shut down, Cuomo rode the R train, and he touted how amazing the whole machine was. So with the L train, the problem is, as Gwen said, there hasn't been any resolution on timing. There hasn't been any word on whether it's going to be 18 months or 3 years or a year. So it's just too soon to tell about that.
And you know, another issue is that once we take these years to fix the tunnel, the L train is the most overcrowded train in our whole system. So how do we go about not just fixing the tunnel, but fixing the system itself? Is there any talk of that?
There are plans as part of the fixing of the Canarsie tube. There are upgrades coming to different stops, Bedford and First Avenue in particular, I think, to increase capacity, and they're trying to get more trains on the line. And so, yeah, that is a part of the upgrades that would be looped into the Canarsie tube project.
So does this bode well for the streetcar? Do you think that's going to add any value, Tim?
I think that's going to be great. I actually think that if they can swing that and they can figure out the economics of that, that would be a really, really interesting way to get about the city. And it's too soon. I mean, we're still figuring out how much the city would commit and how much sort of what the economics are. But I think it could spur talk. I think it's too soon with that, but it could spur talk. Look, we need the streetcar more than ever now that the L train is acting up more.
Well, somebody's listening right now. Let's get on it, Brooklyn. We got the dollar vans running on the old line now. Uber's taking over. City Bike put more stations out there. We got to keep Brooklyn moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hatem, what's the bottom line on how this might affect rents in the neighborhoods along the L train?
I think if you're looking at prime Williamsburg, as I said, 15% is probably the worst case scenario in the short term, in the next year and a half. And, you have to see the brokers' pictures. They're like, this is no better time to buy. You're going to get a 9 to 10% discount if you buy now. Whereas if you buy after the resolution, it may not be the same. And lower down the line, I guess, deeper into Brooklyn, you'll see more rent concessions. So you might see 1 month's rent. The landlord is giving 1 month's free rent. But I don't know if overall rental rates will fall yet because they haven't appreciated to the sort of the manic pace of Williamsburg yet.
Gotcha, yeah.
We'll definitely keep watching this for folks all along the line from one end to the other. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
It's not just Williamsburg. I know I may have mentioned that, but it's such a long line and so many people affected.
It's true.
We've got Ridgewood as well. Ridgewood is a really
Of course.
hot neighborhood, which has been, everyone's like, oh, it's the next Williamsburg. And that, since it's quite a commute now on the L train for them anyway, this is going to hurt Ridgewood quite a bit.
Yeah, a lot of devastating effects this will have on people. Thank you both for being on. We'll have to have you back soon to talk about this as more developments come about. Thank you guys. Great job.
Thank you for being here.